President Trump has announced his free speech plan, and it's so powerful. There's people from both sides of the aisle that are happy about it. But what's this plan actually going to do, and what does it mean for us? Here's the deets that you need to know, and my take on the nitty-gritty details and what I think are some missteps that the future administration needs to take care of right away. My name is Dr. Azadeh Khatibi, aka Dr. Freedom. Let's do this. First, Trump is right when he says that if we don't have free speech, then we don't have a free country. Because when people are afraid or censored by the government, they change their behavior due to fear or to get ahead, or their great ideas don't get amplified because they don't serve the interests of the state. So the collective consciousness of the people, including our children and future generations, that changes because the narratives we tell and hear are different than what's actually in the sum total of our minds. The sad thing is, over time, because they're afraid, people self-censor, and as a matter of course they do that, and then they stop thinking for themselves or questioning, and the true knowledge, it's lost to future generations who are taught from what's out here instead of what's in here. And the authoritative government then takes hold and becomes all-powerful, and it's fed by the matter-of-fact belief and naive trust of youth who grow up in that system, and that's why the right to free speech is our First Amendment, and it must be preserved and honored. Trump goes on to say that what he wants is to dismantle and destroy the sinister deep state bureaucrats, the Silicon Valley tyrants and the left-wing activists and the depraved corporate news media, this cartel that have conspired to manipulate and silence Americans, including regarding public health, which I experienced and advocated against front and center as I spoke out and sued Gavin Newsom and the Medical Board of California against California's anti-doctor censorship law. I think something important to underscore here is that some of these people, not all, but probably many, believe that their role in the censorship machine is a noble one or the correct course, apart from people who are motivated by the incredible power and financial gain in the system, and you know who you are. But the noble-minded believers are those who think, for example, that censorship in the time of an emergency is necessary and appropriate to prevent the populace from acting against the interests of society and the state. And the extreme of this is what philosopher Hannah Arendt called the banality of evil. The banality of evil, where ordinary people do incredibly horrific things without thinking of the terrible consequences for their fellow man. So it's important for us to flesh out what is, for the American public, the concept that many of these people don't think that they're doing the bad or unethical or evil act, and they don't dress or look evil like the movies and TV shows, and they put out a noble and responsible persona because they deep down believe they're noble and responsible. And that's why it's so easy to be fooled by them and to minimize their actions. So what does President Trump plan to do about this? First, he says he's going to issue an executive order banning any federal department or agency from colluding with any organization, business, or person to censor, limit, or categorize or impede the lawful speech of Americans. And he wants to ban federal money from being used to label domestic speech disinformation or misinformation, and fire any bureaucrats if they engaged in domestic censorship, including the Department of Justice and in the FBI. There's a couple things to consider here. First, the word collude is important. Here it indicates this unlawful nature of the government's interventions. And the devil's going to be in the details here because the question is, what constitutes unlawful? He's not saying he's going to prevent a federal department from having any conversations with the outside entities, for example, to alert them with a conversation, an outside entity like a social media company regarding an American saying things the government doesn't espouse or want to promote. Some of our founding fathers didn't want government at all interfering with affecting the lawful free speech of citizens. And I think they were right. So by using the word collude, Trump is still playing it safe and giving government more line on that leash, but it's much better than what Biden did, especially during the COVID crazy times. I urge President Trump to aim higher and stop government from any activity interfering with citizens' lawful speech. The second thing to consider is that President Trump wants to end federal funding of censorship systems and fire anyone who's censored people directly or indirectly. Brava! I am all for this. We saw the government's actions. Even the Surgeon General went after people in 2020 onward regarding COVID. was trying to censor people who were trying to spread scientific information and address government mishandling of the pandemic. And they thought it was perfectly all right to fund censorship machines at universities. And it resulted in unnecessary deaths, mental and physical health problems, incredible economic toll, increased disparities, and years of learning lost, all of which affect the well-being of Americans. They need to have consequences, and firing them helps because it's going to deter people so that it never happens again. And it creates a culture where it will never happen again. The second thing President Trump says he'll do, or at least we hope it'll never happen again. We always have to be vigilant. The second thing that President Trump says he's going to do is he's going to have the Department of Justice investigate all parties involved in online censorship and aggressively prosecute them for any and all crimes. And he's urging House Republicans to send Biden preservation letters to preserve evidence. And again, I think this is a great idea. As I said earlier, it's challenging to prove crimes when there's this gray area of what's government censorship versus government suggestion or alerting. And that's why we need much stricter line instead of gray areas in the first place. Third, the president's going to ask Congress to send a bill revising Section 230 to get big online platforms out of censorship. What is Section 230, you ask? It's part of the Communications Decency Act of 1996, and it gives online platforms immunity for illegal third-party content. It's an incredibly important law because it allowed the internet to bloom like it did. And Trump's proposing that the law be amended so platforms get that liability only if they meet new higher standards. And that sounds good, right? Well, Section 230 has loomed over the heads of tech platforms with this threat of decreased autonomy and more liability if they don't comply, which would affect how you, the end user, experiences the platform. And I'm talking restrictions on your speech, limits on what you can post or how often you can post, possibly slower interactions, decreased anonymity, and more invasive monitoring. And some people would argue that such changes are unlawful because social media is the modern day public square where we should, or the town square, where we should all be able to speak completely free. I'm generally more of that bend myself, although I don't think this anonymity on the internet is always such a good thing because it can promote a lot of negativity on the internet. So we need to know not only how any amendments would actually define the, quote, neutrality, transparency, fairness, and non-discrimination that President-elect Trump is seeking, but the downstream consequences for the public of any specific language in the bill. This is totally figure-outable, but it needs to be done wisely. I am going to add something here that I think they missed that is super, super important, incredibly important, and that's related to freedom and free thought, which is the addictive nature of tech for our children. I would like to see legislation in the bill to protect the brains of minors from the addictive natures of these platforms that we have known to have long-term negative consequences for their precious minds and their physical health. These technologies can be created for minors to be non-addictive, and our government should enact laws to protect the brains and bodies of these children so their minds can be truly free. Fourth, Trump wants to break up the toxic online censorship systems that hunt misinformation and disinformation. He calls for a 7-year cooling off period for employees of security and intelligence gathering offices before they go work for any company that deals with large amounts of Americans' data. And he also wants very strict penalties for government workers who work with outside entities to censor Americans. He calls for immediately stopping funding of all nonprofits and academic programs that do this and not allowing any university who's engaged in censorship activities in the past to access federal student loans and research support for a period of at least 5 years. And he said maybe even more. This is a harsh penalty that to me wasn't fully thought through. What he's proposing, for example, is that Stanford, who did plenty of censorship and blacklist promotion through its Stanford Internet Observatory, have all its research programs at the university that depend on federal funds get shut down or not be able to access new federal research dollars. That part wasn't very clear in his speech. And the same for the University of Washington, which collaborated with them, probably others too. To me, that doesn't make sense. To disrupt, for example, crucial biomedical research that's happening at these universities, important translational research that can help save lives, it seems very counterproductive. Stanford, for example, has a new president, Jonathan Levin, who has advocated for open debate without censorship. If you're going to do something, why not fund anti-censorship research programs at these same institutions, or cease federal funding for 5 years or more for specific individuals who aided and promoted censorship at these institutions? As far as no federal student loans, I think Stanford would find a way out of that penalty or around that penalty, or so that it could serve its students who depend on those loans. But I would be less concerned for them and more concerned about students at smaller universities with smaller endowments. And at this point, I actually want to support those smaller universities than these large educational behemoths. Fifth thing to think about is President Trump, or what he called for, is he wanted Congress to pass a digital bill of rights, including the right to digital due process, and forbidding the government to give digital information requests to tech platforms. And if an American is deplatformed, he wants them to have the right to know the details and get timely appeal. Very importantly, he wants people to be able to opt out of content moderation. And I think it's high time for a digital bill of rights. As I stated before, the social media platforms in particular have essentially become the town public square of our modern age, the town square. People should not be shadow banned or deplatformed if they're not breaking the law. And if there is a problem, they should be told what it is. I, like many voices, was shadow banned during COVID times for speaking out as a doctor. And that should never happen again. With regard to the digital bill of rights, I also feel strongly that we need a right to opt out of digital mind manipulation, including opting out of addictive elements on these tech platforms that are used to keep us hooked, keep you hooked, and coming back again and again like a drug dealer. It's the same neural pathways. This shouldn't just be for children, but adults as well. We now know how harmful these products can be to our focus, our attention, our mood, our inspiration, our time, our family, our communities. And there are ways to make the platform successful and even better without the addictive elements that are currently the opioid of the masses. And another reason to have this opt out of the elements within the technologies that are addictive is that it will prevent foreign actors from making addictive products that deliberately hijack the minds of Americans. I also think it'd be wise for the Digital Bill of Rights to have opt-ins to see a bit more of what your curated list of friends are putting out, and not just an opt-out so you get this endless stream of the internet. So we actually can cultivate a sense of community online. And looking forward, consumers need to know how much of the content they're consuming is AI generated. Part of our success as a nation will be a healthy populace at home and at work, and happy, healthy, thriving people in control of their own minds and their own bodies, which is incredibly necessary for our free country. The free country that Mr. Trump and I and you all want. Let's make it happen wisely. I love you all. Bye.